Morning, everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the key insights of the 2025 diversity report. I've just got a few little bits of housekeeping to begin with. First off is actually I'm a little bit sick, so my voice is going to sound a bit raspy, so bear with me if I need to do any coughing. But other than that, it's the normal sort of housekeeping rules. So the slides will obviously be shared afterwards, so you don't really need to take any notes if you don't want to. All your microphones are muted, but that's okay. You can use the chat feature if you want to share ideas or comments or have any questions for us. That's my colleague in the background that can always help you with something. And then we also have the Q&A feature for you to use to ask any questions. Zoom's had a bit of an update, so if you don't see it at the bottom of your page, it might be hidden under the More section. That's where it was for me. So if you want to add that now, just have a little look for it. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about action sustainability as a whole before we begin. So Action Sustainability is the company that I work for. It's the company that's bringing you this webinar today. And we're a business that doesn't just advise, we empower organizations with the tools and training and expertise to drive sustainable growth. We have three parts of our business. One is consultancy, which comes with expert guidance to do for things like carbon reduction and modern slavery. We also offer training via the school platform, which many of you will be aware of. And then we also have the technology platforms, our sustainability tools, one of which is the diversity tool, which runs the survey, which is the results we'll be looking at today. So at AS, we cover a wide range of sectors that you can see on the screen here, and many, many more as well. And we offer a wide range of services in the consultancy part of the business too. And because of that, we have also a very large range of clients that we work with to deliver impactful and measurable change. And we drive measurable sustainability outcomes through integrated solutions. So we kind of group consultancy, training, and technology together to give enhanced results. So consultancy can help you set clear, realistic, simple goals that align with your business and any regulations that you need to. Our training helps to build skills across your team and also down your supply chain as well. And technology helps you to track progress and spot any gaps and help you report with confidence. And together, these give you strong and faster results. So we've had a real big impact. So we work with over 30,000 companies that trust us. And in 2022, we were honoured with the Queen's Award, and we've trained around 137,000 people in sustainable practices, and we're the team behind the Sustainability School, and we also give back. So 2.5% of our revenue supports ISO 20400, which is a not-for-profit driving sustainable procurement globally, and we're really proud of that. So let's focus on diversity now. So this is our agenda for today. It's like kind of the main area. So we're going to look at the 2025 data set, where it's coming from. We're going to look at the overall industry benchmarks in relation to last year, but then we're also going to look at trends since 2018. So that's kind of when we first started collecting data. Then we're going to look at a few ranges of key insights. Then we'll cover how to retain, promote, and attract employees, how to collect data, and the benefits on your reporting. And if we have time, we'll also go through a Q&A. So before we begin, I just wanted to clear this up, as some people do get confused, myself being one of them, is we are in 2026, as we know now, but we'll be discussing the 2025 data. So that's last year's data, and we will be collecting 2026's data in the spring. So for the purpose of this, we're talking about 2025, so it's potentially last year. So we are the industry's largest repository for diversity data, and we're really proud that people trust us enough to provide and report their data on the scale that we do. But why do we collect this data? First off is to help us identify issues and trends. So we need data to uncover real challenges on organisations and supply chains. We can have all this anecdotal evidence, but that's not really enough. The data helps provide clarity and as an objective view of existing disparities and opportunities for improvement. So it helps us to highlight those gaps. Therefore, it helps us take evidence-led action, helps us make decisions about initiatives, We should basically kind of identify any gaps or hotspots and make initiatives to address those. So we're using that evidence-driven actions to be more effective and ensuring interventions are targeted and also that they're impactful. And then also it helps us to measure progress of initiatives. So we can collect that annual data, we can report it, and we can really see whether a scheme, for example, has been effective in addressing that, if it's made any improvements or not. So, and if that's not a problem, if a scheme isn't impactful, we've still learned from it, etc. So, in short, the data gives us evidence, direction, and accountability that we need to create a truly inclusive workplace. So, the 2025 data set, where's data coming from? So, in 2025, we collected data from 225 companies, which equated to over 466,000 employees. We did see a drop in the number of companies due to a key partner of the survey being unable to support us this year. But what's really promising is we did see the overall number of employees rise, and this is due to large organisations continuing to be asked by our partners, who are National Highways, Network Rail, HS2, TfL, and the Royal Institute of Child Surveyors, to report their data. So people, and also people are coming back even without being asked. They want to see how their data is going and how they can continue to make improvements. However, we have excluded a little bit of data. We've excluded a large tech company who reported for the first time this year. They were very new to diversity and collecting data, so they reported 100% unknowns across all of the categories. So this year, their data has been omitted because it significantly skewed the data set. So from now onwards, the rest of the presentation, we'll be looking at data for 376 employees, 36,000 employees, sorry. So what are the type of companies that are reporting? So the majority of the employee data is from organisations with over 1,000 employees. They make up 91% of the employee coverage, but actually only make up 24.9% of the companies reporting. So actually the majority of companies that are reporting are within that 51 to 250 employees sort of bracket. But their data only makes up 3% of the data set. So when you look at the data like this, you can see that we've really got a mix of company sizes that are ranging from large organizations to ones that are even have less than 10 employees. So 7.2% of the organizations that reported had under 10 employees, which is really great to see that these small organizations are engaging in this sort of initiative. And they want to kind of track and monitor their diversity. So we're now going to look at the industry benchmark changes from 2024 to 2025. So just a year's worth of data, kind of what's changed. And we'll look at this on this slide and the next slide. So you can see that the changes are noted quite clearly via the arrows, like they're red or green, and then you've got the small number next to them to show the change between the 2 years. And then the number at the top is the value for this year, and the number at the bottom is ONS. So ONS stands for Office of National Statistics, and that's the census data. So it's the 2021 census data. And this has been tailored to be working age, so it's more applicable for data comparison. So what the ONS showing us here is that 50.5% of the working age force are women. 20.2% of the working age force in the UK are minoritized ethnic groups, and 15.2% have a disability. So from this data, we can see that the percentage of women and people from minoritized ethnic groups have decreased this year within our industry by 0.8 and 1.3% respectively, which is a step in the wrong direction for what the industry's been aiming for, as these are two key characteristics the industry's been focusing on improving and increasing their proportion in the workforce since the survey began in 2016 for gender and 2018 for all other characteristics. So we can kind of see that this decrease has like broadened the gap between the industry benchmark figure and the ONS figure, which is not really what we want. We want to be closing that gap, as we want our industry to look like the UK workforce. When we look at disability, we can see that the figure has remained relatively stable with a 0.1% increase, which isn't much of an increase at all. And you can see that it's kind of sustained that large gap between ONS, this figure of 15.2, and the industry benchmark of 3% for this year. So it remains an area for focus. And on this slide, we can see sexual orientation, religion, beliefs, and age. So we can see the percentage of people part of the LGBTQIA plus community and under 25s have decreased this year. There's small decreases of 0.5 and 0.2%, but this isn't really what we want to be seeing. We want to be seeing that these both increase. Especially, it's been an area of focus for attracting and retaining younger talent to aid the skills gap, which will be coming in the next 10 years quite drastically. And therefore, we've kind of, especially with under 25s, we want to be closing that 7.1, 12.8% gap to come a bit closer. And the percentage of people over 50 has increased by 2.4%. It's not necessarily an area of concern because the proportion of employees over 50s grouping is very similar to the ONS figure of 29.9. But we do really need to be conscious that there's a lot of tacit knowledge in that group. They're people that have got a lot of experience, have been in the industry for a long amount of time, and we don't want that knowledge just to be lost. So we really need to try to hold on to that age group and getting them to share their knowledge as much as we can. And when it comes to religion and belief, we can see that that increase of 3.4% was the largest increase that we saw over the last year, which is really good. It's starting to close that gap between the ONS figure, but we're still quite a large gap of over 20%. So still something we want to address. So that was just the data change over the last year. But what's really key is the diversity survey initiative has been going from 2016 for gender and for all other categories to 2018. So we just want to look at some key sort of change that we've seen over those last few years, or some changes that we haven't seen that we were expecting. So starting off with gender, when we look at gender, let's come up with a few. What we can see immediately, what immediately stands out is stability rather than change, even though it's something that the industry's been very conscious of and working towards with almost a decade worth of data. So we can see that the 2016 and 2025 value is both 23.4%. So there's not really been a measurable shift. And when we see the big gap when it comes to ONS, it's less than half of what we would like the workforce to be. And people may say, well, it's unrealistic for half the workforce in the built environment sector to be women. Well, we need to be striving towards that because 23% isn't enough. So even if people deem that as an unrealistic goal, it's still a goal that we need to be working towards. When it comes to ethnicity, we can see that there has been an improvement, but we need to think about scale. So in 2018, the representation of people from minority ethnic groups stood at 8.5%. And by 2025, this has increased to 13.9%, which is a positive shift and shows momentum, even after a decrease from last year's value. However, when compared to the ONS benchmark of 20.2, there's still a significant gap. So this suggests that progress is happening, but it's not fast enough, and that targeted action, particularly around senior roles and retention, remains critical, especially for this group. For disability, this data has also been collected since 2018, and the percentage of people with disability has always been relatively low value. So I don't think we've ever gone above 3.5%. So this is mainly because we actually have quite a large proportion of unknown data for disability, which I'll touch on later. So the percentage of people with disability rose from 1.2% to 3%. And while this is more than doubled in representation, it's really still far below the ONS benchmark of 15.2. So we really want to focus, particularly for disability, is disclosure and just getting people to collect this data. That's the biggest barrier of disability category currently, is the lack of data set that we have. So that's our main focus there. when it comes to sexual orientation. Again, we can see that there has been some gradual progress. So the representation of people part of the LGBTQIA plus community has increased from 1.2% in 2018 to 2% in 2025. And this is a movement in the right direction, but it still falls short of the ONS benchmark of 3.9%. But it is close, we are getting there. And what is also important to note is that there is quite a large portion of unknown data in the sexual orientation category. So we feel that it is possible that if that data is collected and reported, we could be aligning more with the ONS value. So that's a real goal for us, is to improve the data collection in this area. And as with disability, disclosure plays a huge role here, because we just like to get this data collected, because if people report prefer not to say, that also tells us something different. It tells us that people may not feel safe or secure in disclosing this information, but not having the data is basically a knowledge gap. So across all the characteristics, the message is relatively consistent. Progress is mostly happening, but slowly and not the scale that we require or would like. The data is challenging us to kind of move beyond just commitment statements and focus on sustained and measurable action. So, and now we're going to look at attraction recruitment. So it's really key to kind of look at if there are barriers to people entering the industry, and if so, where are they? Because that's a way that we can address the percentages and the proportion of protected groups that aren't necessarily in the industry at the same amounts that we'd like them to. For example, like trying to get towards ONS values. So if we're attracting them, if they're being attracted, at what sort of percentages, are we recruiting them, etc. So we're going to focus on ethnicity and gender for this. So we're going to look first at minority ethnic groups being attracted, but they're not necessarily being hired. So over 50% of the applicants for roles in the industry last year were from people from minority ethnic groups. This was a decrease of 5% from the 2024 value, which was 55.8%. But I think we still can celebrate that we're doing something well when it comes to attracting minority ethnic groups, as over 50% of the applicants were from this group. However, it is harder for the minority ethnic groups applicants to be hired. In fact, it's 4.5% harder for someone from a minority ethnic group to be hired compared to someone who is white. And this is a huge difference. And it's really signifying that there are blockers to being hired. And those blockers are affecting representation, because only 13.9% of the industry are from minority ethnic groups. So when we ask people to report this data into the survey, we ask them to report different values throughout the hiring process. So we ask or companies to report the amount of applicants, the amount that then were shortlisted, then were interviewed, and then were hired for each ethnic group, so we can draw comparisons. So we can see this data on this slide. And these are in ratios. So, for example, the overall hiring ratio here for white applicants is 19.9 applicants to one hire. So that means that for every 19.9 people that applied that were white, one was hired. Whereas for minority ethnic groups, the difference is huge. It was 90.7 applicants to one hire. So you can see that's why it's 4.5 times harder to be hired. The ratios are so drastically different. But then what we want to see is we want to look at the sort of breakdown in the hiring process. So you've got the shortlisting, interview, and hire stages ratios. So the ratio shown on the shortlisted is the ratio from applicants to shortlisting. So for white, it was of every 3 applicants, 1 was shortlisted, whereas for minority ethnic groups, it was every 4.3 applicants, 1 was shortlisted. So here we can kind of see where the major blockers are for minority ethnic groups. and they're at the shortlisting and interview stages, as these are the highest ratios of 4.3 and 5.4 to 1. Now, the hiring stage is still high as well at 3.9, but it's just not as high, but it's still higher than all of the ratios for white. There was a rhetoric around qualifications, if this was a factor, but there's absolutely no evidence for this here, as it would not be a contributing factor once you get past the shortlisting stage, and so wouldn't be the cause of the large ratio at the interviewing stage. There's also been speak about right to work, but I think it's maybe on the next slide or on a couple of slides, you'll see the right to work only, I think it's only 5% of applicants didn't have the right to work. So it also does not contribute to these very, very high ratios later on in the hiring process. So when we look at the breakdown for each minority ethnic group, you can see this here. So in red is any ratio that's more than the overall average for people from minority ethnic group. So anything over 90.7 to 1. And amber is anything more than the white average, so 19.9 to 1. Oh, there's the right to work for you. So I think it's 10%, yeah. So you can see here that there was no minority ethnic group that found it as easy or easier than a white applicant to be hired. And we can see that African, Indian, other Black, and Pakistani have ratios much higher than the 19.7 to 1. And so it's the most difficult for these groups to be hired. All three of those have ratios over 100. And it's really, really, really shocking to see. So it's really key that we sort of engage with the hiring process, as we need to address barriers in attraction recruitment. It's more the recruitment, not necessarily the attraction. It's just a way that we can close the gap. It's also looking at these groups, kind of when these groups are leaving, is also a way that we can kind of tackle the loss of this talent alongside just addressing the hiring blocks, as we can address, we've kind of addressed the attraction. We need to address the recruitment, but it's all well and good recruiting people and then losing them early on in their stage of their careers or as soon as they enter industry. That's something we also need to look at, as we need to be kind of supporting these groups throughout. So let's look at the same sort of data for women. So something really important to understand here is that women are also applying. So attraction also isn't a core issue here. In 2025, women made up 26.3% of applicants, which is slightly down on last year as well, from 27.6%. But they're still, like, this value is still comfortably above the industry benchmark for women that we've got this year, which is 23.4%. So what this is telling us is that applicant levels have remained kind of broadly consistent year on year, and that attraction outreach efforts have had some impact. Women are engaging with roles and interested in entering industry. However, despite this interest, women remain underrepresented overall, and therefore the challenge isn't necessarily getting women to apply, but it's what happens after the application. And this kind of points us towards the recruitment process, the progression and retention areas, like I just mentioned, about ethnicity as well. So let's have a look at their hiring process. So here we've got women against men, and we can actually see that the overall hiring ratio for women is lower than that of men. But what's very interesting to see is the ratios throughout the hiring process. So women are shortlisted at a ratio of 4.2 to 1 compared to 3.5 to 1 for men, suggesting that early stages in the recruitment process seems to be a bit of a bottleneck for women. However, differences start to emerge as candidates move further down the process, and the interview ratio shifts from 2.8 to 1 compared to 3.7 to 1 for men. At the point of hiring, 2.5 to 1 versus 3 to 1 for men. So while women tend to progress throughout the later stage of recruitment relatively more easily. The blocker seems to basically be at that shortlisting stage. Um, and although the hiring ratio for women is lower than that of men, is not necessarily resulted in an increase of women in the industry. And so we need to look at where kind of we're losing them to kind of plug the gap there. And it's also interesting to see that it's relatively stable throughout the hiring process for men. So they've got that 3.5, 3.73 to 1 ratio throughout, which is not something that we've seen for women there. So let's think about people at the top table. So who's on the board essentially? Um, so who makes up the top table? We can see that 86.1% of organizations this year reported they had a training or promotion policy, which is up 5.5% from last year. But this doesn't always translate into a diverse board, even if you've got equal opportunity policies or training and promotion. So this year we received data on board members from 86 organisations, covering 605 people. And of these, women make up 25.3% of board members. So that's an increase from 22% last year and sits 1.9% above the 2025 industry benchmark. And it wasn't something that we were necessarily assuming that we would see this year. So this is positive. It indicates that some progress has been made, but still women remain unrepresented at the board level when it comes to how society looks, and when it comes to application and workforce data. But when we look at ethnicity, it's very different. We can see that only 5.3% of board members are from minorities ethnic groups. So that's a decrease from 6% that we had last year, and it's significantly below the industry benchmark of 13.9%, which is therefore highlighting a clear gap between workforce diversity and leadership representation at this stage. And deep analysis would be great. Like I would love in the future of the diversity survey to have information on salaries, to kind of see like where different people sit, and how they're paid and where the different groupings are. That's something I would like to engage with because I think it would tell us a lot about higher positions and where people are throughout the workforce. And when it comes to people with disabilities, 2.5% of board members have a disability that they have declared. And that's a small increase of 0.5% on last year's data, but it still sits well below the industry benchmark and ONS benchmarks. So overall, board level diversity remains limited, and while we have seen some small movements year on year, this hasn't yet been a significant shift. And it reinforces the importance of training, promotion pathways, and retention is a key like lever for long-term change. And I'll speak later on why having a diverse board is a key tool in having a diverse organisation. So we're going to look at the age profiles for the data set now. So here you can see the age groups that we use in the survey. So we've got banding going on. And you can see the different colours for the vertical lines for the different years. So we've kind of got from 2018 to 2025. And then that horizontal line is the ONS working age figure. So we kind of want to be aiming to be kind of on that line. So we can see that we're not. And essentially that the industry has more people working within the 25 to 49 age range, typically, although we did see a little decrease in 2024 and 2025 when it comes to the 45 to 59 age group, which is coming more aligned with the ONS figure. But the percentage of the over 60s is a lot lower, and the same for the under 25s. So when it comes to the over 60s, we really need to be careful not to lose this talent prematurely. As there's a lot of knowledge in this group, at the benchmarking event where this data is first presented, which happened in January. We spoke about like shared mentoring and championing and how we need to use these people who have a lot of experience and knowledge and share it with the younger age groups, as we don't want to lose this stuff and we still need to value people as they come towards the end of their careers. As this will help to inspire younger people and keep them in the workforce so they can see their careers and their career future if they would like to progress within the industry. And it could also help us target those large losses that we can see earlier on in people's careers. A key thing in the report, which is a big summary, well, not a big summary, a big in-depth look of this data, which I'll share how you can download this at the end of the webinar. It kind of covers a section on part-time and people over 50, well, particularly men over 50. The key sort of that's the sort of key age where they go part-time and they use that part-time sort of allowance. And that's really great because it allows people to stay in the industry for longer and we keep that talent. So we need to be kind of utilizing that more to kind of get that knowledge and keep it in the industry. Yeah, and something to be aware of. And what's also really interesting and something that's been a very hot topic for years is that big gap for the under 25. So in the 2025 data set, the under 25 proportion, as we spoke about earlier, is 7.1% of the workforce, whereas the ONS figure is 12.8%. So we still have a long way to go when it comes to efforts of trying to attract young people, and we still need to focus on doing that and potentially use alternative methods to just apprenticeships, as those are great, but they aren't necessarily showing us that they are necessarily effective currently. We need to try other initiatives too. So this slide and the next slide, we're going to look at leavers data. So here we're looking at the age profiles for leavers for age and gender. And this sort of data is a great way to understand kind of when people were leaving and in what sort of percentages and proportions and how leavers look across the age profiles. So we basically want to look at the shapes of the graphs. So you'll notice that there's a really sharp peak for women in that 25 to 29 age group, and the 30 30 to 34 is also quite high. We're actually losing almost 50% of women before the age of 34. We're losing 49.6%. And in comparison, we're losing 38.7% for men in this age range. So we're losing a much larger proportion of younger women there. And also, it's when it looks at the shape, you'll see that the men's graph kind of looks very similar to the all graph, the all genders graph. So they still have this peak at an early age, but then it sort of decreases and then plateaus. Whereas for women, it's more like a steady, sharp decline. It's more like steps. And the steps signify a more rapid decline. Whereas for men and the all, it's more loss and then it's kind of steady. And that's what we would like to see for women. We'd like women to match more of the overall trends for leavers. And we've kind of seen this over the last few years. There's been this theme of women leaving early on in their careers, which doesn't seem to be changing. And we really need to engage with this further when it comes to women leaving the industry. So again, here we're looking at the shape of the graphs, but this time for minority ethnic groups versus white and all. If we look at the middle cluster, for minority ethnic groups, it's very high, but it's for the same sort of age ranges. It's from 25 to 34, maybe even 39, you could argue. And there we're losing 52.9% of minority ethnic groups before the age of 34. And we can see, well, if you think about it, if I flip back to the last slide, the women and minority ethnic groups have a similar profile. They have that step, sort of sharp decline step look, whereas white and all have a very, very similar profile as well. They have that peak, yes, at the younger age group, and then it's more steady, just like we saw on this slide with men and all as well. Um, so yeah, we also need to look focus on levers for men and minority groups, and this will help be impactful to help increase reputation in the industry if we're going to start to engage in why they're leaving and sort of address those issues as well. So, how can we retain, promote, and attract people? So, there's obviously a number of ways that we can help promote um, and attract different people to the industry and also retain them. So, for example, we typically focus on apprenticeships to attract young people, but there are also other methods we need to be kind of engaging with to attract and retain people of all ages. Apprenticeships have always been around, well, not always, but they've been around for a lot of years. And post-COVID, we really hoped that as funding came back, apprenticeships would help to increase the amount of young people within the industry, but that didn't necessarily come to fruition, and it's definitely like leveled out now. So things like dual mentoring um, are great as this shares tacit knowledge. So this is what people who are already in the industry, how can we kind of prevent them from being lost? Is sharing this knowledge from more experienced employees with employees earlier on in their careers, as I mentioned earlier. So they're both getting benefits, so they're learning from each other. So it's a great form of knowledge share. We also can help add people into industry by allowing grants so that people can have access to training that they may need or be asking for. And this will be particularly useful for helping people enter the industry and also keeping them with the industry, especially when it comes to the green skills gap, which is obviously starting and will continue because as technology advances, we need the industry to keep up with that and not many people in the current workforce will be skilled and stuff that's still emerging now. So we need to keep up with that. And this kind of links into the continual professional development. So that can make people feel valued and less likely to move industry as they see a progress path for them, that the industry and their companies are investing in them as well. We can also do things like on the job training to reduce barriers. So, not necessarily asking people to have a degree or an apprenticeship, but they can start a role and learn there as well. And also, of course, that early career exposure to the industry. We've done it for years, but still staying, getting into schools, going to universities, and kind of showing people what is out there and how they can have different paths into the industry as well. So, why does kind of any of this matter? Um, we looked at the board earlier. So an average board member age is 63. So yeah, an average board member's age is 63, an average CEO's age is 55, and an average member of the senior leadership team's age is 44. So these figures indicate that people from underrepresented groups, women, minority groups, and also people disabled, many of them leave the sector well before reaching these ages, and therefore, typically, these ages that are associated with leadership positions, they might not, the pool of these people being able to apply for them and getting these positions is a lot lower. This represents a critical loss of potential talent that could have contributed to a stronger and more diverse leadership in the future. And what does this big 30% on the screen mean? Well, there is the 30% Club is an initiative, and according to them, 30% represents critical mass from which point minority groups can impact boardroom dynamics. So if you can get 30% of the board to be from a minoritized group, and that includes women, people with disability, and ethnic minority groups, particularly in their research, this can kind of this is like the mass where it becomes a trigger to really helping other groups also become more represented in the business as a whole. So can we get that? So that's 30%. um, that's kind of what we're aiming for to get to that 30%. It's like a goal for the board members essentially. So it's very key to note and speak about unknowns and prefer not to say. So we go to look at them and how they've changed over the reporting period from 2018 to 2025, but just some definitions to help. So I prefer not to say is where employees have been asked to disclose their data and they've chosen not to provide one of the specific options. So, for example, if they were asked a question around gender, they've chosen not to select man, woman, transgender, or non-binary, non-conforming, and they've been used the prefer not to say option. Whereas unknown data refers to when the data has either not been asked or they didn't report an answer. So obviously we'd rather have people click prefer not to say and have those prefer not to say values than the unknowns, as prefer not to say can provide insights to attitudes of where disclosing data. Is people may not feel comfortable doing that, whereas gaps are just gaps. So unknowns basically don't tell us anything. So this graph shows the trends over time for 2018 for the unknowns. So overall, there has been a decrease in the unknown data sets for all characteristics, bar gender and age. There have been fluctuations throughout the years for each characteristic, as we can see there's up and downs. And we can see there's also still a long way to go. For example, if we look at the percent of religion, sexual orientation, and disability, the unknown values are still over 35%. And therefore, over a third of the data set is essentially missing, and something that is really key and needs to be addressed. The decreases that we have seen are not as linear or as fast as we would hope, and it's also disheartening to see this emergence of the unknowns within the age and gender categories since 2020. And there's something that we like to nip in the bud, as we don't necessarily want to see our data sets becoming less robust and less transparent as well, especially because age should be collected by all HR systems, and gender is the second most popular thing to be recorded. So that's something that we would like to not see rise in the future. So on this slide, we're going to look at the impact on prefer not to says when unknowns are reduced. There's this common thought that if the unknowns are reduced, the prefer not to says will essentially like swap with them because people don't want to disclose their data. But this isn't the case, and we can see that here. So here we can see the average prefer not to say change with an unknown reduction in the yellow and the green. And then in the white, we can see the unknown average decrease. So you can see that the prefer not to says do increase when the unknowns decrease for all characteristics, apart from disability, where we also saw a reduction. But what is great to see is that the average increase in prefer not to says is never as high as the unknown decrease, and shows that people will disclose their data when they are asked to for it in general. That people are more likely to give an answer other than prefer not to say when they are asked to provide one. So this should help dispel this myth that people are not willing to disclose their data, because in general they are willing to disclose this data, especially when it comes to disability, where we saw the unknown average decrease by 3% for organisations that did have decreases, and they saw the prefer not to say decrease. So this is really, really, really great to see. So how can we improve data collection? So there are a few ways. It's common for people not really to know where to start or how to improve the data that they have. But there are a few ways to improve the data you have. The first step, though, is to identify where you have gaps, for example. So, for example, you could report your data into the diversity survey, and there you'll see where you have percentages of unknowns or you don't have unknowns throughout all of the different characteristics. And once you've identified where these gaps are, there are a few things you can do to improve your data collection and responses. One is by having a HR system in place. It may seem simple, but some people just don't have one in place. And they will help you to store the data in a useful and usable format. It's also really key to allow employees to go in and edit their data as they wish, as some characteristics do change throughout your life. And it's very good practice to allow people to go in off their own accord and edit these data points. If you don't have an HR system, you can use a duplicable survey to collect this data. We actually have one which I'll make sure that goes out in the with slides, which you can use, which you can just send out to your employees. It's anonymized, and they just basically answer the questions, and then you have a data set, and then you can just repeat that every year as you wish. And then another very key point is education around why you as a company are asking for this data, so people understand why it's important, and how it will benefit them, their colleagues, and the workplace. So it's really important to kind of speak to people about why you're asking, and also when you do this to reassure them that what the data is being used for, that you're not selling the data, that it's anonymized, that you aren't using it to pinpoint anyone. And these can be common feelings that people have, and that you're using it to basically essentially improve the workplace and make it more inclusive for everyone. And the main thing is you've just got to ask the questions. As we just saw that if you do ask, most people most of the time will give you an answer. And if they don't give you an answer, that's still telling you something. So yeah, essentially you just need to ask the questions as well. So what are the benefits of reporting annually? We're just going to quickly look at the subset of data of reporters, which we called the repeat reporters in the report this year and when we did the benchmarking event. So essentially, these are 46 organisations that have reported every year since the survey kind of moved online in 2021. Before that, we used to collect data through spreadsheets, which was a bit of a minefield, but now being an online system, it's very easy to just go in, report your data in a standard format. So since we've kind of moved on there, we've been able to track these repeat reporters and see how they have sort of changed over the years. And it's really, really useful to kind of show the impact of reporting over a number of years, as it shows what's possible if you use your data to identify areas for improvement and put plans in place to do that, essentially. So you can see the sample size at the bottom, and then we're going to look at the changes over the last few years. So if I click these out for you, you can see the industry benchmarks at the top in the purple circles. Then you can see the arrows indicating if it's positive change in green, negative change being red. Then the percentage change from 2021 to 2025 is that small number, and the 2025 value is the one in line with 2025 horizontally. So here we here we can see the changes. And since sorry, essentially the data shows that the percentage of women, minority ethnic groups, and people with disability have all increased. Women and minority ethnic groups by just under 2% from 2021 to 2025. So we're showing that there have been positive improvements, and these figures are moving towards ONS figure. Progress, you could argue, is slow, with only essentially 2%, just under a 2% increase over the last 5 years. But it is positive progress, so it should be noted. And then when we look at the other categories of sexual orientation, religion, and age, we can see that there has been an increase in the percentage of LGBTQIA plus individuals, people with a religion or belief, and people under the age of 25. The increases are slightly smaller, but they are notable. And therefore, every characteristic has seen an increase, bar the over 50s, which is great to see. And the over 50s isn't necessarily an area of concern right now, as the value still sits above the industry benchmark and the ONS working figure of 29.9% for over 50s. So it's at 31.5, so it's still relatively high and relatively stable. It is a decrease of almost 2%, so something we need to be wary of, as for all the reasons I spoke about earlier, but isn't necessarily 100% right this moment. And it's also what's really, really key to note is the percentages for this group, the 2025 percentages, every single one of them, bar the under 25s, exceed the industry benchmark for every single characteristic. So they're overperforming the industry apart from the under 25s, which is really, really good to see. So this group in general is really understanding their data. They're seeing the kind of need to report their data. They're actively engaging with their data by identifying where they're falling short, by putting initiatives and schemes in place to try and address these shortcomings, and assessing their success by annually reporting and tracking progress. When we spoke to this group and engaged with them, that's kind of what we learned from them. And this data indicates that repeat reporting can be linked to improved performance as well. So better data can lead to better insights and better actions. And that's kind of why we're encouraging all organizations, large, small, any tier, any sort of size, and all different sectors to take part in this year, the 2026 survey. So it will be opening in spring, probably around April or May, and it will run through until August. And it'll be really good to get your data on there. Your partition is crucial. The bigger the data set, the more we're looking at the industry. So we'll obviously be sending around comms when it goes live for anyone that would like to report. And by feeding into the survey, you'll not only strengthen the sector-wide picture, but also help build better insights and shape more targeted support and demonstrate your organization's commitment to fairness, inclusion, and respect. And together, through like strong and more complete data, we can drive the change our sector needs to see. And if you report your data, you will receive obviously a dashboard with your data. And what happens every year is the benchmarks are updated. So if you reported 2025, definitely go back and log in because you'll see your data points for your protected characteristics. And you'll see the industry benchmark will be a target on there and also the ONS benchmark. So you'll be able to see kind of where you sit in relation to those. And if you report the next year, you get your next lot of data with also the adjusted benchmarks. So you can kind of see how you track over time, which is really, really useful. And we also have the diverse survey benchmarking report, which I wrote. So for anyone that is interested and wants to learn more or wants to learn about something specific, for example, you want to look at part-time or you want to look at your sector, which I would definitely encourage someone to go and look at if you want to look at your sector-specific benchmarks. You can do that here. They're in the appendix. So you could look at for the rail sector, what was the rest of the industry doing, essentially, again for rail, against sexual orientation, religion, etc. So that's also very useful. So I would encourage downloading that. You can use that QR code, or we can send a link as well in the follow-up. So I think we have some time for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can go into the Q&A. Okay, we only have one question so far, and it is, will these slides be available? And the answer is yes, we will share them. Don't worry about that. Let me have a look. Besides training availability leading to more women on the board team leadership, the respondents continue to share what the key drivers were for improving the figures and blockers for declines. No, when we ask questions, this is the second year that we've asked about board members. So we would like next year to engage with people who are reporting their board member data to kind of get more nuanced and anecdotal evidence and stories about it. But yeah, since it was only the second year, we literally just asked people to plug in their data if they had it. So it's something we want to be developing further as well. And also just the survey is always ever expanding and changing. So this year was the first year that we introduced the options for transgender options in the gender section. So we had non-binary, non-conforming before, but now we also have the transgender options. And 2 years ago, we expanded the sexual orientation category. So now I believe the options are heterosexual, bisexual, gay or lesbian, queer, pansexual, asexual, or other sexual orientation as well. So we're always expanding. But when it comes to most of the categories, we align with ONS. So that's how we can always have those similar benchmarks. So with ethnicity, we've aligned with ONS to follow their example with ethnicity as well. Um, when it comes to board members, if a company is a partnership that has no board, would you like to support in terms of partners swapped in place of board members? Oh, I'm not sure actually, Amanda. I might pick that up with via email with you as well, how we can make sure we get correct data in there. But yeah, when it comes to what we ask for in the survey, we also provide support documents. So we have a downloadable sort of it's basically an Excel with all the tabs which can help you prepare your data for the upcoming survey. And we have a few options of how you upload that data. So if you're a small organization of under 250 employees, the the options available for you is you can either upload your data via a spreadsheet, which is a lot faster. It basically allows you just to import the data, or you can manually put in like the number of people, the number of women, number of men, etc. And for large organizations, it's promoted you use the file upload, the Excel upload sheet. It just puts a lot quicker for you. But if anyone needs any help uploading their data when we go live, you can email me. It's not a problem. I'll be able to help you through that. And we also have lots of help guidance videos, and we'll be doing webinars to help people through that as well. Have we got any other questions? Not right now. Thank you for people telling me to get well. I will. After this, I'll be mute for a few hours to rest my voice. Okay, well, essentially now what will happen is you will receive the slides. You will receive a link where you can download the report if you're interested. We'll send the duplicable survey, and I'll also send a link to the landing page for the survey for when it does go live. And we'll be obviously making sure that we send comms out to you all so that you know when the survey is open that you can report your data as well. So thank you for joining today, and I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day. Bye, everyone.